Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
This is your time. This is your call to arms. For the Cryptid Connection is your voice. I'm your host, J-Day.
And I'm your host, Steven. Welcome to Cryptid Connection. Let's get this chat started. Hi, everybody. This is Steven and Jennifer, and welcome to Cryptid Connection. With us, we've got Chris James, and Chris James is the host of the Strange Matters podcast. How are you doing, Chris?
Strange things.
Did I say strange? Oh, I did. Oh, my God. Oh, that was my first edit.
You're thinking of Art Bell with Dark Matter.
Yeah.
That very well may be. And which is really bad because I haven't listened to that podcast in years, but I've been listening to yours for about a year now religiously. So I'm one of those three people, you know.
My fan club.
Here we are. You've always wanted to know where we were. We're here.
So we're with Chris James, Strange Things tonight. How are you doing, Chris?
Pretty good. This weather's about to drive me nuts. It's cold in the morning, and then it's hot in the afternoon, and then it's cold again in the evening. But, hey, that's Texas.
It's Texas, but lately here, I think everybody in Texas has had far too many sick days because this weather sure makes your allergies act up or you get a cold.
That's the trouble with being retired. There's no sick leave.
That is true.
It's my own time.
I'm self-employed. I kind of understand where you're coming from. Jennifer, however, punches a clock. She's a slave.
I'm a wage slave of sorts. I get yelled at if I get out sick too much, and with a 4-year-old and daycare, it's bound to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chris, tell me something. I want you to go ahead and talk about the book that you just did.
Alrighty.
Let's hear about it. Can you tell us a little bit?
It's a whole bizarre story that really started back in 1990. And I don't know if you want to know the whole background story or just the fact that it was a bizarre occurrence that happened. Paranormal, pretty much.
Let's go ahead and I think let's hear it because it will help people get to know you. Because honestly, we're going to get a different side from you than what you normally put on the podcast. And so I'd rather go ahead and just hear your story out of your own mouth for right now, if you don't mind. And if we have any questions, we'll ask.
You'll probably have a lot of questions by the time I'm done.
Fair enough.
When my class arrived in Laredo, Texas with the United States Border Patrol, there were 36 of us from one class that all went to the same station. There were only 12 journeymen at the station to teach us how to actually do the job. All the nonsense they teach us at the academy, it's the first thing you do is you forget all that. Now you learn the real job. But because there were so few journeymen and so many new folks, they would pile like 2 or 3 of us in a vehicle with one guy, and he's supposed to teach us how to do the job. As soon as we got our year of probation in, they started putting 2 of us, 2 trainees together and sending us out to work, not really fully sure what the heck it is we're doing. And one night, I was the semi-senior guy because I had a whole extra month over the guy in the car with me. And it was a midnight shift. The guy in charge wasn't even a supervisor. He was just a senior agent. And he told us, don't get in trouble. Be back here at 8 o'clock in the morning. That was it. He didn't care if we talked to anybody. He didn't care if we even left the parking lot. just as long as we didn't get in trouble. So we take off. We head down south. We're driving along Highway 83. And on the side of the road, up on a little hill that we referred to as the party house, we could see a bonfire. And it attracted our attention because you don't know what could possibly be there. Would smugglers start a giant bonfire? Yes and no, because they knew that by being out in the open like that, it would be less likely for us to go to investigate. So a lot of times they would make these huge dramatic shows of, look, there's nothing going on here, and people would ignore them. We decided to go have a look. And at the time, we used to have a switch on the dashboard that we could throw, and it would kill all the lights in the vehicle. No brake lights, no backup lights, so you could drive into a location and not give away your presence. We go down this long paved road towards the river, and then we turn onto a gravel road. We go down this gravel road back into the trees, and it's one vehicle wide. We get to a corner. We go up a dirt road that goes up on top of this hill. And that's where the fire is. And as we're coming over the top of that hill, I see 15 to 20 people standing in a circle around the bonfire. They're wearing full-length brown robes, and they have their hands up in the air.
Huh.
And they're chanting. First thing that entered my mind was a movie called Race with the Devil, 1975, with Peter Fonda and Warren Oates. Two guys stumble across a group of Satanists in the middle of the night, and then everybody gets killed. And I'm thinking of this as I'm looking at these guys in the brown robes, and they turn and look at us. They didn't look happy to see us. My partner started yelling, "Let's get the heck out of here," which I thought was a really good idea. I threw the vehicle into reverse. Now, keep in mind, I have no reverse lights. I stepped on the gas, and we shot backwards way too fast. I managed to make a 90-degree turn onto the gravel road without being able to see where I was going. I'm torn between looking back over my shoulder or looking forward to see if we're being gained on by these characters. We hit the pavement, go squealing out to the highway as fast as we could go. And by this time, we've kind of started to slow down a bit, started to think, and it's like, what did we just see? Satanists. Did you see any dead bodies? Didn't see any bodies. Who do we tell? Now, the last thing you want is a bad reputation at work, because it will follow you the rest of your career. I did not want to be known as that guy. So between the two of us, we decided we're not going to tell anybody. We're just going to keep this a secret.
It never happened, huh?
Went back to the station, checked in. Guy in charge asked if we'd seen anything, and we both said no. And we went home. 20 years later,
It was a prank.
on Coast to Coast, they used to have Ghost to Ghost on Halloween night. And I thought this would make a really good show. And after 20 years at work, nobody cares what I thought. I was at the point where I could just walk out the door and never come back, and they couldn't say anything about it. I could retire at the drop of a hat, literally.
Mm.
So I'm talking about this occurrence, and I decide I'm going to call Coast to Coast, Ghost to Ghost on Halloween night and tell them my story. So I sent in the story so they could read it and decide if it was airable. They decided it sounded good, so they said, we'll call you Halloween night. Be ready. Then they changed our schedule at work, and I had to work that night. Got home. There was a message on my recorder. They were disappointed that I wasn't there to talk to them, and, well, that didn't make my day. However, later on, Art Bell had started Spooky Matter, his own radio show.
Mm-hmm.
And for Halloween, he was going to have, did I call it Spooky Matter or Dark Matter?
You called it
His show was
spooky.
called Dark Matter. He was going to have Spooky Matter on Halloween. Sent in my show, only this time it was actually Art Bell who read it, and he liked the story. So along about Halloween night, 20 minutes into the show, I got to talk to Art Bell and tell him this story of woe of running into Satanists on the river. Once the story was out there, once I had said it to the public, probably a couple million people listening in, I still had the story stuck inside my head. It was still playing over and over. kind of like a bad dream that you just can't get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
My wife said, "Why don't you write a book about it?" Like, yeah, great. That's going to be like 2 pages. Who wants to read a 2-page book? And she said, well, fill it out a little. Make it into a fictional story, but use that as the beginning. So one day, with nothing better to do, I sat down at a computer and I stared at a blank sheet of paper for about an hour. And then I started writing. And the story, I changed a few things. The main character is a young boy instead of a full-grown man running from Satanists. And he stumbled across a group of Satanists down on the river. And the next thing I know, I'm 200 pages into this thing, and it actually read pretty well. Some people actually said that they liked it. The book was called Ragman. Horror, lots of bloodshed, not a children's story.
Sounded like it came too easy to write, though.
That's what happens when you spend time in law enforcement. You get a lot of internal horror stories, really. Things you see, people you talk to. Well, after writing several other horror stories, I discovered real quick that people that read horror stories have issues. Not all of them, just 1 or 2. And they want to tell you about it. And some of these people live in a far scarier world than anything I could ever write about. And so I decided instead of horror, I wanted to go into humor. So I started writing humorous stories instead. A book called Flying Saucers Attack Walmart was my first shot at it. And some people like it. It's humor with a little science fiction. Well, a friend of mine, Ishmael, had a group called the Laredo Paranormal Research Society. And there are local ghost and UFO investigators. I'd known the man for 30 years. Never told him about ghosts or UFOs because I didn't want him to think I was weird. He never mentioned anything about it to me because he didn't want me to think he was weird. We're both in law enforcement. I run into him at a UFO conference. It's like, okay. So I asked him if the group had ever had their story written, and he said no, but they were looking for somebody who could put it down on paper. And I volunteered. For the next year, I followed the LPRS folks, the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, around. I went on ghost investigations with them. I went on UFO hunts. I listened to audio recordings of ghostly voices. I watched videos over and over until I could play them with my eyes closed. And I managed to get this book written, the LPRS, Laredo Paranormal Research Society. First time it came out was in 2016. And my friend Ishmael had arranged for a book signing event at the local comic book store. We have high reading ability here in Laredo sometimes. Book signing at a comic book store. It worked. While I'm there telling people about the book I'd written, a woman comes up named Maggie, and she tells me that her husband, Arturo, has a radio show, and he'd like to interview me on the radio. Well, okay, that sounds interesting. She didn't bother to mention that it was going to be in Spanish. And so Arturo would ask me a question. My wife would translate it because I can speak enough Spanish to get in a fight, but I can't speak enough to get out of one. I would answer the question to my wife. My wife would tell Arturo what I had said. It made for a very long radio interview. Well,
but an interesting one, I'm sure.
Arturo decided that, and these are his words, someone in Laredo needs to do a radio show like Coast to Coast. And I told him, great. When you find somebody, let me know, and I'll listen as long as it's in English. And then a little while later, he says, somebody in Laredo should do this radio show, maybe a podcast on strange things. Like, that's great, wonderful, let me know when you find somebody. Finally, he just said, sit down at this desk. He stuck a microphone in my face and told me to record a show. And the very first show I did was on UFOs because that was how Art Bell had started. His first show was UFOs. Now, I am not likening myself to being anything close to Art Bell. I'm just trying to stumble around in the path that he set out before us. And that is how the podcast Strange Things got started.
Speaking of that, Chris, if I can interject a little bit, what was one of your most favorite shows you've done thus far?
It probably, and I hate to have to name just one name, would be Cliff Barrickman from Finding Bigfoot, just because he is such an entertaining person to listen to.
Ah.
You can ask him a question, and then for about the next 20 minutes, he will be telling you all kinds of really interesting, entertaining, hilarious items, because he used to be a school teacher. And he said that he knew that in order to keep his students awake and interesting, he had to entertain them. And so he carried his teaching ability into his Bigfoot research. He's a really great guy to talk to. He's also a very hard guy to get a hold of.
I've been to a conference where he was one of the guests, and he is very entertaining.
Huntsville, last year.
Yes, sir.
Actually, it was the year before. It was 2017.
Yes.
And it wasn't Huntsville. It was at though he was at Huntsville. We were at Jefferson because it was the first time we ever laid eyes on you. You probably did not even know or recognize us, because I didn't recognize you. It was Jennifer who recognized you, and evidently you and I sat right next to each other at Jefferson in 2017. Our tables were right against each other, and we were sitting there, and she pointed you out, and I was like, "That's who? Who is this?" And then that's when I started paying attention to your podcast.
Dang.
Meanwhile, I was on episode 50 or something.
The couple that was sitting at the table with me, the Coopers, they were from just the north side of Dallas, and their daughter started her own blog for a while. I don't think it's still going, but she got so wrapped up in Bigfoot, it was her mother was saying, "Who's this girl? Is that my daughter?" Because she said it was such a change in her personality being at the Bigfoot conference. Like she discovered what she wanted to do for a while. But it is funny to find out that as you go through life, the people that you encounter, not even realizing it, only to find out later that, oh yeah, we were sitting next to each other, as you say. That dinner was really good.
That it was.
It was all right.
Both of them, the Italian and the barbecue.
I liked the barbecue. It was the Italian I wasn't entirely too sure about. If I'm remembering right, wasn't that the pizza that had to be rushed in or something? I'm not sure. But anyway.
Yeah, well, it was so much better than that first dinner we had in Jefferson. How many years ago? 2015, I believe, when they ran out of food.
Oh, really?
Yes. The dinner, you know how you pay extra if you want to have dinner at the end of the show. And apparently a lot of people had snuck into the room that hadn't bothered to pay for dinner. So they had food for so many people, and then they had so many extra people eating that hadn't paid, and losing the, oh, there it is.
Oops.
But they ran out of food before they ran out of people to feed. And my wife had a whole lot of potato salad and macaroni, and that was it.
Oh, no.
Well, things happen. That's when Craig decided that instead of having dinner that way, they'd move it to the Big Pines Lodge. That way you knew who was there.
Right. Oh, no, I was about to say they're doing something similar at the Huntsville conference this year, because they're having it on it's a riverboat. And I can't think of its name now. Something Queen. I want to say Bayou Queen or something like that. Anyway, it's on Lake Conroe, but they're having that dinner on Friday night prior to the conference actually happening on Saturday. And so we're going to be on that cruise with that. And so I was really hoping you'd make it to Huntsville, and I know you can't. You're going to be at the UFO conference the week prior. Am I correct, if I remember right? And
yes, the Edinburgh UFO.
Right.
It's April 6th, and even though the two are not the same weekend, it's just the logistics of getting up there. And it's only 400 miles from here to Huntsville.
We can feel you. Trust me. We're 300 some odd miles from Huntsville ourselves. I totally, completely understand.
You know, one year my wife couldn't get the Friday night off to drive up early for the Jefferson conference. So I had to wait for her to get out of school. Then we jumped in my truck and took off. I think it was already like 6. Drove 500 miles to get there and then could barely stay awake during the conference the next day. I don't like doing that.
No,
It
those
was
turn
fine
and burns are
when
no
it-
fun.
The whole idea of these things, you should have fun. It shouldn't be a bunch of work to go to a conference. You should be there to enjoy yourself, which unfortunately sometimes you just can't do.
This is very true. We enjoyed the heck out of ourselves at the Jefferson conference in 17. And then in 18, at the first Huntsville conference, I ran ragged. I was playing guest, or I was playing the host to out of town. I'll call him a personality. I don't want to name names, and so I'm gonna keep that one quiet. But he had come out from the West Coast, and I was balancing. I was representing the group of local researchers out there in Huntsville, in that area, and we as a group had invited this man out, and and everything else. However, that being said, being Bigfoot researchers, or I should say enthusiasts, because we're all, as much as we want to claim researchers, there's no such thing as a real researcher. Anyway, we still had certain things that certain members didn't want to necessarily reveal to him. There were other, there were a whole bunch of issues. And so to keep everybody in the region happy, we were like, okay, we'll show him this. We're not going to show him that, that kind of a thing. And I guess he realized real quick that he was being minded a little bit, because it was a chase after that. He had one or two other local friends that were here, and before I know it, we're chasing him through the forest because he's going from one area to another, and we're like, oh, what's he doing? And part of the problem is because, he's out there and he's filming. And that's the thing that was really, scaring everybody, is because the Forest Service out there is so sensitive about any kind of publicity or anything like that. And we just knew it was going to come down on us. And we did not want that to happen. And so, the last Huntsville for me was actually a lot of work and a lot of running around. It was a very unique experience, but it did cap off almost an entire week that we spent out in the woods. And so that was good.
It's, unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast. Anytime you have a group of people, you're going to have a group of ideas. And even if one person's in charge, there's always going to be, oh, no, we need to do it this way, we need to do it that way. And then you get other issues, and it can always be a problem.
Yeah, and it's really just, it's not so much that we have any one person that was in charge or anything like that. We were just trying to respect each other's wishes.
Yeah.
You've got some people that had been out there researching for years. You had other ones that were fairly new.
Don't step on anybody's
Yeah, you
toes,
don't want
so
to.
to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And and we've got certain areas. Those are the old timers. We let them have them. We've got these over here. These are for the new guys, and then the rest of this is for all of the rest of us, kind of a thing. And especially with Sam Houston out there at Huntsville, there are certain areas that are publicly known and publicly acknowledged. And they're so overrun now by anyone coming in. And then we have other areas that honestly we're trying not to talk about.
Yes.
And a lot of people get bent out of shape by that. And we have several members that I guess you could say honestly are concerned for safety for people's safety to go out in these particular parts. And it's not necessarily just a Bigfoot thing. We've got, smugglers going out there. You've got human trafficking. They're meth labs that are getting out there. And
Poachers that don't want to be discovered.
Yeah, not to mention the poachers. And, and people, Squatchers is going out there and they're going to go, oh, yeah, well, they don't know that a month ago a meth lab got busted right out there, or something like that. And you don't know what the neighborhood is because especially in Sam Houston, it is one of those one of those forests that weren't naturally a forest when it was created. It had already been parceled up into various farms and things like that. And so the forest is actually existing around these islands of private property. And it's very easy to cross boundary lines without knowing it. And so you can be out there, and if you miss a little mark, next thing you know, you're on someone's private property, and you may not like what they're doing, and they certainly may not like you there.
Then you've got the wild hogs and other creatures out there that don't like humans. They like humans too much.
That's just the spice of life.
See, the last time that we were out there, the most dangerous thing we ran into was actually a pack of wild dogs.
Yes.
They kept interfering. They were living in our camp area, apparently, and we were in their territory. They didn't like that.
Yeah, they did not appreciate us in that particular hunter's camp at that time.
Yikes.
And it's not exactly something you can just sit there and pop a couple shots off. It's you got to use a level head, and so discretion was a better side of valor in that situation.
Oh, yeah. I was mentioning my book, The LPRS. When I first wrote it, I told the gang that it would be a dynamic book. In other words, if somebody joined the group later on, I could add them simply enough. Since it's self-published, I don't have to get somebody's permission to change a chapter or to add or to subtract. And so we had several people come in who had really good, interesting stories. And so it's like, I'm going to add you, I'm going to add you, I'm going to edit the thing. So I took the book and I re-edited the whole story, sent it off to the publisher. It looked good on my computer. Get the books back, and I run down to Edinburgh UFO conference, and I started selling my books to people. I only sell them for $10 a piece because I am no Hemingway.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened. I don't remember what it was, but I'm thumbing through the book, looking for something, a picture to show someone, and I start noticing that some of the content has lines through it. And I thought, that's weird. And so I started reading the book as I'm going, and I discovered that all of my edits were still in the book. Things I'd taken out, things I'd added. Somehow an edit copy had gone to print instead of a finished copy.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. I wound up having to throw away quite a few copies of my book, and there are still folks out there who may have gotten their hands on one of these screwed up copies. So I'm still in the process of trying to track people down, saying, if you get a bad copy, let me know, and I will give you a better copy, because I don't like putting out trash like that. But I was more surprised than anybody when I saw those edit marks. It's like, I even asked another writer, well, what the heck is this? And when he explained it to me, I was like, you're kidding. That's the book that they put out? Well, it's the book I put out. Noé Torres, who's a writer who has numerous books out on UFOs, and I got lucky enough to actually be able to talk to the guy on several occasions. He does the Edinburgh UFO conference, so he's the man to talk to.
We might end up having to get him on later. See, Cryptid Connection is not just about Bigfoot. It's about any and all cryptids, including aliens and paranormal events.
That's right. It's paranormal and aliens and cryptids. So everybody kind of has its own home within the site. So
yes, it's a happening location. I like going there when I get a chance and taking a look, because there's new stuff popping up all the time.
Well, we appreciate that. It's still in its beginning stages and everything else. And so, but you have been a good, solid contributor. We do appreciate that.
So if anybody out there listening wants to give us some constructive criticism or suggestions, we'd be glad to listen.
That's right. You can put all the hate mail right there on Cryptid Connection, right there by Chris James. No.
Because unlike a certain other social media platform, we allow for certain things to go on without putting you in jail.
I noticed there's this bizarre, I don't even know what category to put it in. It's a thought process. You get people that are into Bigfoot, and I've talked to them. And, oh, yes, we're going to go out in the woods, and we're going to look for this 8-foot-tall, hair-covered creature that 90% of the people on the planet don't believe in. But you UFO people, you're all crazy.
No,
and
sir.
I've talked to UFO researchers who are out in a field staring up at the sky looking for little green men in flying saucers, and they think anybody that looks for ghosts, there's something wrong with those people. And I've had ghost hunters who swear up and down that looking for ghosts is perfectly natural, but anybody out in the woods looking for Bigfoot, there's something wrong with them.
It's kind of like the triangle effect.
It's like, let's face it, we're all doing some rather crazy endeavors. Typical science is not going to take us seriously no matter what happens. If a UFO were to crash in the middle of the city, some people would still manage to believe it is just a weather balloon. A Bigfoot would just be some guy with too much hair who needs a bath. And that ghost that everybody sees, oh, that's just swamp gas. It's just, that's the nature of people. So instead of being so worried about what everybody else is thinking or doing, I say pick a subject and go look into it. Or if you want, go after all three. That's what I do.
I think you summed it up beautifully just now. That makes a lot of sense. Don't be afraid to have an open mind about anything. Learn what you can, and then decide what's interesting to you.
That's right. Stick with your purpose, I think. It's funny you made that observation and everything else, because in the last couple of years that I've been active in cryptid research and activities and everything else, and I'm still kind of iffy as to what you're supposed to call yourself. I'm a Bigfooter. That's what I am. I freely admit it. There are so many camps. I've noticed I was active back in the mid to late 90s, and then right around 2001, 2002, I got out of it. I moved from Washington to Texas, and I went about 14, 15 years. And we had life happen, and I had moved to Texas. There's no Bigfoot in Texas. There's no Bigfoot this side of the Rockies. Really, honestly, that was what my thought was. Everybody who saw Bigfoot that was east of the Rockies, they were meth heads. That was all I was concerned about. I mean, that they were kooky. They're just. And then, ironically enough, what got me sucked back in was I discovered Sasquatch Chronicles, and I started hearing people give these accounts east of the Rockies. And I was listening to it commuting back and forth in my vehicle. And that got my interest started again. And I'm not going to go into it right now, but this is what ultimately got me back into the field. What I have seen between those two periods, the early or mid to late 90s, that 5-year period from 95 to 2000, versus from about 2014 to now, the difference between the communities is just, it's massive. Social media has completely just morphed it. There was very little paranormal, or I don't want to use the term woo, but that's the one that most people bounce around. There was very little of that in the 90s. Everything was almost entirely flesh and blood. Now it's almost completely opposite. If the flesh and blood is still a majority, I think
they believe that the incidents are more paranormal related versus flesh and blood related. Is
Correct.
that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, correct. If flesh and blood is still a majority, it's very much a silent majority, because all the vocal is now with the paranormal aspects of it, and it really has just changed the whole nature of Bigfoot, and it's fractured the community. It has polarized it. The cryptid community in general has become kind of like politics. You just, it's very hard. You get the conservatives and the liberals. Well,
Yeah.
you've got the paranormal and you've got the flesh and blood groups. They just don't play well together. And that, as much as anything else, that was one of my goals that I wanted to do when we created this website. Was we wanted to give a single unified location where both could coexist and in a controlled interaction have an exchange of ideas, but they weren't forced together. It was just like, on Facebook, you can control and create your own groups, and they can be public or private or even secret. We have the same ability on Cryptid Connection, except you don't have the Big Brother aspect. We're not tracking you. We're really not even, what's the word I'm looking for?
Controlling?
Thank you. That's still not it exactly, but that's the whole, that's the idea. There's.
We're not looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, we're not.
Laughing at your
Right.
opinions and your ideas.
Minus a few very basic filters that we have built in. We don't want anything obscene or anything like that. What your groups are secret, and they're in with yourself, and you can control who's in them and who's not in them and everything else, and you can control whether they're public, private, or secret. But the thing is, you can't get that with Facebook. Here, well, you
can't get that with the other social
I'm sorry,
media.
but you're right. You're right. You can't get that with the other social media. However, I'm almost tempted to say that the other social media is they've reached the point where it's like saying that red colored soft drink that everyone loves because it's the real thing. I mean, if you guys are really going to nail me on this is going to be hard not to do with any name brands.
Well, let me put it this way. Like, people who are on the fence between flesh and blood or paranormal, they have more of a comfort level.
Yes, they do.
Within this group that we have created.
That is very true. And they can control where they go back and forth between the two. And we also have set up to where anybody who wants to promote an idea or a theory or announce a finding, or whatever gets to them, they can create their own blog entry that can then be shared within the community. It's not going to be public. It's not going to be accessible on the internet as a whole. It won't be search engined or anything like that, but it will be within the community. Someone could look it up. And so, and then those are open to comments. And the entire idea behind this is so that way we have a somewhat limited ability of peer review that is brought in to encourage the debate and everything else. Now that moderated was the term I was looking for before. We're not heavily moderating. That being said, I'm not going to let people murder each other on our website.
But you're allowing everybody to share
They can
ideas.
have separate ideas. I had two very specific people in mind when I was going to create this as two extremes. I had on one end of the ultra-conservative side, the ultra flesh and blood, very skeptical. I had Steven Streufert. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he does Bigfoot books or whatever out of Willow Creek, California. And then on the other side, I had Christopher Noel, who does... he's out of, I want to say it's Maine or is it Vermont? I can't remember. He's out of New England. But anyway, he's very much right now into Bigfoot structures and things like this. And we've gone from someone who is extraordinarily evidence only, physical based, just, we're not even sure these things exist, to the opposite of extreme of not only do they exist,
They have a community, and they have a lifestyle.
Exactly. And I wanted a place where these two could get together without killing each other.
Yeah.
They have their own corners. But
you've heard the story about the four horsemen of Bigfooting, how they spent most of their time talking bad about each other instead of actually looking for Bigfoot.
This is very true.
Exactly.
And they did. I mean, now, to be perfectly honest, Renee and Grover, they kind of brought it on each other. Their personalities were just kind of built for that kind of a conflict.
But the thing is, we're speaking of Bigfoot. It's not only about Bigfoot.
No,
we are expanding as daily. We're adding different sections.
Right. There is a cryptid influence here, only because that is our actual background, and so that's where the starting point was. But we realized real quick, well, if the cryptid community could benefit from something like this, then the paranormal and then the UFO could also as well. Because part of the deal is everybody is part of their own groups. We're fragmented across all three branches here. You've got this group over here. You've got this group over there. And normally they don't ever interact. And if you're a newbie, you just came in, you're interested, you may go and you like Group A. You really like what you're reading. So you start attending some of their stuff. You follow their discussion groups. But you know what? You never really get your foot in the door. You're always an outsider, because that Group A has already become its own private social club. And that's really all it is. It's a group of close friends at that point, and it's very difficult to get in. Same thing with Group B over here. There is no home for that newbie to go where he may interact with people from A and B. And that's the thing. With our site and everything, we're wanting and we're inviting people from Group A and Group B and everything else to come in, but it's separate from their group. They can come in and their group can have a presence, but their group is accessible on our page. And so, and everything. Now, they have private portions that are there, but at the same time, the newbies can sit there and they can read all about them, and they can find out, hey, let me contact them when I can't and everything else. One thing we're doing that... Hold on one second.
That's 3 everything else's you've said in the last 2 minutes.
I love you, dear. I will stop. I will try to do this. Chris, you can keep that in. That's okay. This is just our dynamic.
Apologies.
I do very little editing when I'm doing a podcast, simply because I already put 10 hours into each show just in research. By the time I record the show, that's 11 hours. I don't make any money doing a podcast, so I'm not going to be doing a 40-hour work week just trying to talk to a bunch of people about crazy things. Strange.
I can understand that entirely. I really can. Oh, my goodness.
I did do some major editing when I interviewed Ken Gerhardt the second time, the time it actually recorded. And he told me right at the very beginning his cell phone was horrible. And so I recorded him, and you could see the wave on the voice monitor.
Yes.
When I would speak, I was getting a good signal. When he would talk, he was getting about 50%. So I had to go through, and I had to cut the show. Every time I would speak, every time he would speak. I would speak, he would speak. I had to cut it into little bite-sized pieces. I had to turn his volume all the way up. I had to turn my volume all the way. It took me 4 hours to edit the show to a point where it was listenable. Not that it was good, but it was listenable.
That's dedication.
I had that exact experience with the show we just recorded last.
I wouldn't have put that much effort into it if it hadn't been such a nightmare the first time I recorded Ken. I wasn't about to call him up and say, hey, dude, can we try this a third time? But no, that was a horror show. Yeah.
You got him 2 times. You recorded it once, and everything's good.
It was still a nightmare. Yeah,
I can imagine.
People out in the community that listen to podcasts, they're like, "Oh, your podcast sounds horrible. The volume was this, that, and the other, and your music was and they don't stop to think we're not making any money doing this. We're putting a couple $100 worth of equipment on a desktop. We're sitting down, we're doing all this research, we're talking to people, and we're letting them listen for free, and they get upset about it.
Isn't that amusing? Not really.
Kyle Filson. I don't know if he meant to send me a text or not, but we get to texting back and forth. He's from Expanded Perspectives. They're out of, I can't think of the name of the town right now. Super good podcast. They talk about everything on the planet as well, but we got to going back and forth about, you put so many hours into your show, and the next thing you know, some guy's talking bad about it, and it's like, what can you do? But that's the world we live in, unfortunately.
You got to take the good with the bad.
Very much so.
Unfortunately, a lot more bad seems to make it onto the page than the good.
Tell me something.
Yes.
Where do you get your topics?
Just really off the top of my head. I'll sit here on a weekend, watch a few TV shows, mysteries and monsters and mysteries in America sometimes, ancient aliens, just whatever just happens to be on. I'll be sitting there watching the show and a thought will pop into my head. That one little tidbit might make a good show. They were talking about people vanishing mysteriously one time. I don't remember. I think it was Monsters and Mysteries they had David Paulides. And the next thing I know, I'm hammering out a show on mysterious vanishings. It's whatever strikes my interest at the particular moment.
Oh, so far so good.
When I first started the show back in 2016, after Arturo conned me into doing it, I thought maybe I'm going to do 6 or 8 shows, and that's going to be the end of it. And that was 150 shows ago. And even I have a really bad tendency as I'm sitting in front of the microphone doing a show, suddenly I'm thinking, I should do a show about some other little item that I just heard about. So I'm trying to take notes, talk, think at the same time. That's not a good way to doing things, but, well, that's me.
Fair
I can
enough.
actually try to write a book while driving a vehicle.
One of those multitasking, always busy types.
But I'm not good at doing 2 things at once.
See, that's my problem. I can't. I'm a single-minded person. I focus on this, and this is it. And the house could burn down around me. And, but, you have to get my attention.
Speaking of the book once more, I like talking about the book because it's my book.
Fair enough.
When I first wrote it, I put in just a blank statement. We don't have Bigfoot near Laredo. And I had interviewed Craig Woolheater from the Texas Bigfoot Research Center. And I just asked him, why do you suppose we don't have Bigfoot sightings in Laredo? Too hot, too dry, not enough trees. Simple formula, really, because look at the areas where you see Bigfoot reports. Big trees, lots of water, cool climates. And that was the thought process for the entire LPRS for about the next couple of years until I got to talking to Joe Rogerio, who had a Bigfoot sighting on Highway 359, halfway between Freer and Laredo. 59, halfway between Freer and Laredo. He saw Bigfoot on the side of the road. And if you look at the area, there are no trees. There's hardly any water out there except that 1 week out of the year when it rains like mad. And yet he saw a 8-foot-tall, hair-covered creature standing on the side of the road. 2 o'clock in the morning, middle of nowhere, and it was stalking a couple of deer as he drove by.
Mm-hmm.
I have never been the flesh and blood Bigfoot camp. I've never fit in with their thought process. I have always been the trans-dimensional kind of person thinking that Bigfoot comes and goes as it wants is simply because nothing else explains the ability. Somebody's following Bigfoot tracks and all of a sudden they just disappear. Somebody sees Bigfoot in a location and then it's gone, vanished in a blink of an eye.
It does produce a lot of questions. I'll give you that.
And we're going to break it off right there. We will be releasing part 2 shortly. The interview takes a couple of surprising turns. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Anyway, before we go, I'd like to invite everybody to come out and check out cryptidconnection.com. I think we have a lot to offer on the community. We are still growing. We're still adding new things. Please come in, get on the ground floor. Help us develop this vision that we have. Y'all have a good night, and we will see you in a little while.
Every cowboy, he always misses when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about running, and I'll get out on the town just for myself. And that's when I saw her, and she looked right through me. And when I said I do that day, I really do. 'Cause every cowboy, he always misses his shot when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about riding, and when I get the first draft back with no red ink, but I've been thinking to do my best work. Yeah, I've gotta leave this town to find my way. And when that plane touched down on that island town, I knew that my life's work was in their hands. So I started digging wells of water, and I'm a hero in their eyes. It's clear to see. 'Cause every cowboy, he always misses his shot when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about the time that I have wasted sitting here. 'Cause I've been thinking that all this thinking is the thing that keeps me first.